He picked up my cane with 2 fingers like it was something dirty and tossed it into the trash bin by the door. Not angrily, casually, as if he were throwing away an empty cup. I remember thinking, very clearly, that this was the exact moment when he stopped seeing me as a person. I am 68 years old. I walk with a cane because my right hip does not always obey me, especially in the mornings. The doctors call it age-related complications. I call it my body reminding me that I have lived a full, difficult life and paid for it honestly. The cane is not a weakness. It is a tool. Or at least it was, until my son-in-law decided I no longer deserved it. We were standing in the hallway of their house. Their house, although the word still tastes strange in my mouth. I had moved in after my fall last winter, when my daughter insisted I shouldn't live alone. For now. That for now stretched quietly into months. I learned how to take up less space. I learned which floorboards creaked and which doors annoyed him when they closed too loudly. I learned to speak softer, to move slower, to apologize before anyone accused me of anything. That morning, I had leaned my cane against the wall to take off my coat. It slipped, tapped the floor once. A small sound. Barely anything. He looked up from his phone with that familiar expression, irritation mixed with superiority. "Do you really need that thing all the time?" he said. I didn't answer. I rarely answered anymore. Silence kept the peace better than words. That's when he grabbed it. I watched him open the bin, drop the cane inside, and close the lid. One smooth motion. My balance shifted instinctively, my hand reaching for something that was no longer there. The wall was cold against my palm. "You'll manage," he said. "You're not that helpless." My daughter was in the kitchen. She heard it. I know she did. She stayed quiet. In that moment, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not shock, clarity, the kind that comes when all doubt finally leaves. This wasn't about a cane. It wasn't even about respect. It was about power. And he believed he had all of it. He turned and walked away, already done with me. I stood there longer than necessary, steadying my breathing, my leg trembling slightly. I did not reach for the trash bin. I did not say a word. I simply memorized the way the hallway looked, the position of the bin, the time on the clock above the door. Because some habits never leave you. I have always paid attention. I have always noticed details. And I knew, with the same certainty that told me not to cry, that this house remembered everything, even when the people in it pretended not to. If you enjoy the stories here, dear, you're welcome to join our Patreon. There you'll find exclusive tales that never appear on YouTube, and new stories come out earlier than anywhere else. The link is just below. We're waiting for you. After that morning, I became more careful with my body. Not because I was afraid of falling, but because I understood something important. In this house, my safety was optional. I learned how to move by holding on to furniture, the back of a chair, the edge of the counter, the doorframe leading into the bathroom. I timed my steps so I wouldn't need to rush. Rushing had become dangerous anyway, not just for my hip, but for my dignity. A woman who rushes looks unsure. I no longer allowed myself to look unsure. Living with my daughter and her husband had taught me many quiet lessons. The first was that being welcomed is not the same as being wanted. They never said I was a burden. They didn't have to. It was in the pauses when I entered a room, in the way conversations stopped and restarted without me, in how my presence was tolerated, not included. My daughter, Claire, still called me Mom, with the same voice she used as a child. but now it sounded thinner, stretched between loyalty and fear. Fear of conflict, fear of choosing, fear of what her husband might say if she defended me too openly. I didn't blame her the way younger people blame. I had lived long enough to understand how dependence reshapes people. Her husband, Victor, liked control. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind that wears clean shirts and smiles at neighbors. He controlled the thermostat, the grocery list, the television volume. Eventually, he controlled the atmosphere itself. You could feel it when he came home, the air tightening, everyone adjusting. I adjusted too. I stopped watching the news in the evenings because it annoyed him. I stopped calling my old friend Margaret because he said I talked too long. I stopped making tea after 9 because the kettle was too noisy. Each small surrender felt harmless on its own. Together, they built a cage that looked like consideration. Before my fall, I lived alone for 11 years. I paid my bills. I cooked my meals. I decided when to sleep and when to wake. Independence does not disappear overnight. It erodes when you're told, repeatedly and gently, that you are lucky someone puts up with you. The cane had been my last visible reminder that my body had limits. Limits make people uncomfortable, especially men like Victor. Limits interfere with schedules, with expectations, with the fantasy that everyone should function smoothly for his convenience. After he threw it away, I noticed something else. He never looked at my face when he spoke to me anymore. He spoke over me, past me, as if I were furniture that might answer back by mistake. I began to understand that staying quiet would not protect me. It would only teach him how much more he could take. That realization did not make me brave. It made me patient. I had raised a child alone after her father died. I had worked 40 years without anyone noticing how tired I was. I knew how to endure. And I knew something Victor didn't. Women like me don't explode. We endure, we observe. And when the moment comes, we act without noise. Victor liked to present himself as a reasonable man. That was his favorite role. Calm voice, measured gestures, polite smile when others were around. If someone met him for the first time, they would describe him as solid or reliable. Men like him rely on that. It becomes their armor. To me, he was different, not openly cruel. That would have required effort. Instead, he practiced something far more efficient: erasure. It started with small corrections. No, the cups go here now. You're using too much water. That's not how Claire likes it. He said my daughter's name often when speaking to me, as if borrowing her authority made his words heavier. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His disappointment was always implied, never stated. It hung in the air like a smell you can't quite locate, but can't escape either. When guests came over, he transformed. He pulled out chairs for me, asked if I was comfortable, told stories about how lucky we are to have Grandma with us for a while. He laughed easily then. People nodded, smiled at me, and I smiled back, because correcting the illusion would have taken more strength than I wanted to spend. The moment the door closed behind the last guest, he exhaled, literally, as if my presence alone required recovery. I began to notice patterns. He never asked me questions unless someone else was listening. He never thanked me for anything, even when I folded the laundry or watched their son so they could go out. He never said my name. I was she, or your mom, spoken in a tone that suggested inconvenience rather than relationship. Once I overheard him on the phone. He was standing in the kitchen, back turned, thinking I was asleep. She's old, not sick, he said quietly. She plays it up. It's manipulation. Claire feels guilty. I sat in my room and listened to the house breathe around me. The refrigerator humming, pipes clicking. A place filled with proof that I existed, yet somehow I was being rewritten into a problem that needed managing. The worst moments were not the sharp ones. They were the ordinary ones. Dinner conversations where my words floated unanswered. Decisions made about my schedule without consulting me. Jokes that landed just short of insult, leaving me no clean way to object without looking sensitive. "You know how she is," he'd say lightly. And everyone would laugh. Even Claire, sometimes. Especially Claire. Laughter is a shield for people who don't want to choose sides. I watched my daughter shrink in ways she didn't notice. How she checked his face before responding. How her apologies came faster than her opinions. I saw myself in her, years ago, before life taught me what silence costs. The cane incident wasn't a surprise. It was a summary. Victor didn't throw it away because it annoyed him. He threw it away because it reminded him that I existed independently of his permission. Because it symbolized limits he couldn't control. Because he believed I would swallow it the way I swallowed everything else. And for a moment, he was right. I said nothing, I did nothing. But silence is not always surrender. Sometimes it is inventory. And by then, I had counted more than enough. That evening, no one mentioned the cane. It was as if the object, and the act itself, had been erased by mutual agreement. Victor moved through the house with his usual confidence. Claire cooked dinner. Plates were set. The television murmured in the background. Normality was restored, or at least the version of it that required my silence. I ate slowly, carefully, keeping my right leg angled just enough to ease the ache. Balancing without the cane required constant attention. Every movement had to be planned. I was aware of my body in a way I hadn't been for years, every shift of weight measured, every step negotiated. Not one of them offered to help. Claire glanced at me once, quickly, then looked back at her plate. Guilt flickered across her face and disappeared just as fast. Guilt is uncomfortable. People either act on it or bury it. My daughter had learned to bury things very well. Victor talked about work, about a colleague who didn't pull his weight, about how difficult it was to manage people who expected special treatment. I listened without comment. Men like him often confess without realizing it. They believe their words describe others, never themselves. After dinner, I stood to clear my plate. The chair scraped slightly against the floor. Victor winced. "Careful," he said. "You don't want to fall again." I looked at him then, not sharply, not accusingly, just long enough to let the moment stretch. "I don't," I said. That was all. Later, in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and allowed myself to feel the day settle into my bones. The house was quiet, too quiet. I thought about the trash bin by the door, already emptied, my cane gone with the rest of the day's waste. Something useful reduced to nothing because it no longer suited someone else. I remembered another time, years ago, when a supervisor told me I was slowing the team down after I asked for shorter shifts following surgery. I had thanked him for his honesty and gone home to think. 3 months later, I left that job with my pension secured and a letter from the labor board he hadn't expected. I have never reacted quickly. Speed favors the confident, not the careful. That night, I slept poorly. Pain wakes you in layers. First the body, then the mind. I lay there listening to the house. Footsteps above me, the low hum of electronics, the faint click of a door opening and closing. Victor going to check something. Or someone. He liked to make sure things were where he left them. In the early morning, I woke with a thought so clear, it felt placed there deliberately. He threw away the cane because he thought I had no proof. No witness? No leverage? I smiled. Faintly, in the dark. Because while Victor controlled many things in that house, he did not control its memory. He had forgotten about the small black cameras he installed last year after a package went missing. One by the front door, one facing the hallway, one angled just enough to catch the trash bin. He had bragged about them then, about being prepared. I lay still, letting the idea settle, letting it grow roots. For the first time since my fall, I didn't feel unsteady. I felt ready. I didn't rush to check the cameras. That may sound strange, but urgency clouds judgment. I had learned long ago that the best decisions come when the pulse is steady and the hands don't shake. So I waited. I made breakfast as usual. I wiped the counter. I folded a load of laundry that wasn't mine. Victor passed me twice in the hallway without looking at me once. Good, I thought. Let him stay comfortable. It wasn't until the house emptied, Claire at work, Victor gone shortly after, that I moved. I didn't go straight to the living room where the monitor was. I went to my room first and sat on the bed, letting my body settle. 68 years teaches you respect for your own limits. Righteous anger means nothing if your back gives out halfway through. The cameras were connected to an app on Victor's tablet. He never bothered to password protect it properly. He believed privacy was something other people needed, not him. The tablet sat on the sideboard, exactly where it always was. Some people lock doors. Others rely on arrogance. I carried it carefully, like something fragile, and placed it on the dining table. Then I sat down and breathed for a moment before touching the screen. I wasn't nervous about what I would see. I was nervous about what I would feel. The footage loaded slowly. Front door camera. Timestamp. There I was, coat half off, cane leaning against the wall. The angle was unflattering. It made me look smaller than I am. Older. That surprised me. I had never seen myself the way others saw me on bad days. Not posed, not prepared, just existing. Then Victor entered the frame. I watched his face as if it belonged to a stranger. The casual impatience. The flick of his wrist as he grabbed the cane. The absence of hesitation. He didn't look around. Didn't check if Claire was watching. He didn't even glance at me. That was what struck me most. To him, the act didn't require acknowledgement. The cane disappeared into the bin. The lid closed. I paused the video. For a moment, I sat very still. Not because I was shocked, but because something deep inside me had finally aligned. Doubt has weight. When it lifts, you feel lighter than you expect. I rewound and watched it again. Then again. On the fourth viewing, I noticed details that mattered. The way he said, "You'll manage." The way my hand reached out instinctively and found nothing. The way my body adjusted without permission, already compensating. That mattered. It told a story without words. I checked the hallway camera next. It showed what came after. Me standing there longer than necessary. Victor walking away. Claire appearing briefly in the background, stopping, then turning back toward the kitchen. She had seen it. That knowledge hurt more than I anticipated. Not sharply, dully. Like pressure behind the eyes that never quite becomes tears. I didn't blame her yet. Blame is lazy. Understanding takes more work. I saved the clip, not dramatically, just calmly. I sent it to a private folder, then backed it up twice. Old habits. You only get one chance to be prepared. When I put the tablet back, I wiped the screen clean of fingerprints. I left the room exactly as I found it. Evidence means nothing if the other side knows you have it too soon. That afternoon, Victor came home early. I heard him moving around, opening cabinets, checking things. He stopped at the dining table, then at the sideboard. "Have you seen my tablet?" he asked. "It's where you left it," I said. He found it and frowned, checking the screen. My heart didn't race. Fear depends on uncertainty, and I had none left. That evening, he was unusually polite, asked if I needed anything, spoke more softly. Control wavers when intuition senses a shift. He didn't know what had changed, only that something had, and that I knew was just the beginning. The next few days passed quietly, and that worried me more than open hostility ever could. Victor became careful, not kind, careful. He closed doors more gently. He asked before moving things. Once, he even asked if my leg was giving me trouble. The words sounded rehearsed, as if he had practiced them in his head on the way home. Claire noticed it too. I saw confusion in her eyes, hope mixed with suspicion. The way people look when the weather changes without warning. I didn't change my behavior at all. That was important. I thanked him when he held a door. I answered when spoken to. I moved slowly, deliberately, still without a cane. Let him believe his small correction had worked. Let him believe I had adapted. Inside, I was working. Every morning after they left, I returned to the recordings, not just the one with the cane. I widened the timeline, days, weeks, ordinary footage most people never watch. It turns out ordinary is where patterns live. Victor had a habit of standing too close when correcting me. His body angled forward, mine backing away. He had a habit of rolling his eyes when my back was turned, of gesturing sharply, then smoothing his face when Claire entered the room. Nothing dramatic, nothing a stranger would call abuse, but together it formed a rhythm. Pressure applied, then hidden. I clipped several moments, labeled them neutrally. Date, time, camera number. I wasn't building a case yet. I was building context. What surprised me most was my own expression on the recordings. I looked smaller than I felt. Shoulders slightly rounded, hands folded. A woman constantly bracing for impact that never quite came, and therefore came every day. Seeing yourself from the outside is not easy at any age. At 68, it is brutal and clarifying at the same time. I did not recognize myself fully, and I did not like that. One afternoon, Claire came home early. She found me sitting at the table sorting papers, medical statements, old bank documents, things I had postponed dealing with because life was busy. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Organizing," I said. She hovered, unsure whether to press further. Finally, she sat across from me. "About the other day," she began, then stopped. I looked at her and waited. Silence is uncomfortable. It makes people reveal more than they intend. "I should have said something," she said finally, "about the cane." "Yes," I replied. She flinched at my tone, not angry, just factual. "I didn't want to make things worse," she said. That sentence told me everything. Worse for whom? Not me, not herself. Worse for him, or for the version of peace he controlled. "I understand," I said, and I meant it. Understanding does not mean acceptance. It simply means you see the whole picture. That night, Victor asked Claire if everything was okay between us. I heard him. He phrased it as concern, but his eyes kept drifting toward me, measuring. She said it was fine. I went to bed early and lay awake, thinking about timing, about leverage, about how people like Victor operate. They don't fear confrontation. They fear exposure, not to the world, to themselves, reflected back without distortion. I was no longer invisible to myself, and that was dangerous for him. The cane was still gone. My hip still ached. But something else had shifted into place, a steadiness that had nothing to do with balance. I wasn't preparing to argue. I wasn't preparing to accuse. I was preparing to stop participating in a version of my life that required my erasure. And once you see that clearly, there is no going back. The decision didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It came the way most truths do at my age, quietly, without ceremony, and impossible to ignore once it settled. I stopped thinking in terms of endurance. For years, endurance had been my answer to everything. Endure the bad marriage until it ended. Endure the double shifts. Endure loneliness after my husband died. Endure pain, noise, disappointment, silence. Somewhere along the way, endurance had started to masquerade as virtue, as if surviving something automatically made it right. But endurance is not the same as living, and it is certainly not the same as dignity. That realization came to me one afternoon while I was standing at the kitchen counter, waiting for the kettle to boil. My leg throbbed, a dull, persistent ache. I shifted my weight, misjudged the distance, and had to grab the edge of the counter to steady myself. The movement was small, but it startled me. Not because I almost fell, but because no one noticed. Claire was scrolling through her phone. Victor was at the table, typing on his laptop. Two people, close enough to touch, neither of them looking up. I could have fallen. And the room would have stayed exactly the same. That was the moment endurance stopped feeling noble and started feeling dangerous. I finished my tea and took it into my room, closing the door behind me. The click of the latch sounded louder than usual. Final. I sat on the bed and looked around at the space that had been assigned to me. Neutral walls, a borrowed lamp, a dresser with only half my things. Temporary, they had said, as if temporariness excused everything that happened inside it. I thought about my life before this house, the apartment I sold, the furniture I gave away because it wouldn't fit here, the independence I folded up neatly to make myself easier to accommodate. No one had forced me. That part was important. I had volunteered, out of love, out of fear of being alone, out of that old, stubborn belief that mothers are meant to adjust. Victor sensed the change before I spoke a word. Men like him always do. Control depends on predictability, and I had become unpredictable simply by withdrawing my effort to please. He began hovering, asking where I was going when I stood up, offering help I hadn't asked for, correcting me more gently, as if softness could erase history. One evening, he said, "You seem distant lately." "I'm thinking," I replied. That unsettled him more than anger would have. Later that night, I opened a folder I hadn't touched in years: insurance documents, property records, beneficiary forms, the dull paperwork of a life lived responsibly. I read slowly, carefully, line by line. It turns out that even at 68, there are parts of your life that still belong entirely to you, if you bother to remember them. I realized something then that made me sit back and exhale. I was not trapped. I was inconvenienced. I was uncomfortable. I was disrespected. But I was not powerless. The house was theirs. The control was his. But my choices were still mine. The footage sat quietly on my phone, backed up and waiting. Not as a weapon, not yet. More like a mirror. Proof that what I felt was real, measurable, undeniable. I didn't plan revenge. That word is too loud, too dramatic. I planned correction. Correction of a narrative that said I was fragile. Correction of a dynamic that said I should be grateful for mistreatment. Correction of my own habit of accepting less just to keep the peace. When you reach a certain age, you understand something younger people don't. Time is not something you waste on teaching others how to behave. You simply decide what you will no longer tolerate and adjust your life accordingly. That night, as I turned off the light, my leg aching but my mind unusually calm, I knew this much for certain. Victor thought he had taken my support away when he threw out that cane. What he didn't understand was that I had been standing on something far stronger all along. Money has a way of revealing the truth faster than words ever do. I hadn't thought about my finances in months beyond the basics. Rent no longer existed. Utilities were handled. Groceries appeared without my involvement. Dependence creeps in quietly, disguised as relief. But that afternoon, sitting at the small desk in my room, I pulled out my folder and reminded myself who I had been long before Victor decided I was inconvenient. I was not careless with money. I never had been. When my husband died, there was no safety net waiting for me. I learned quickly that paperwork mattered. Signatures mattered. Ownership mattered. I learned to read everything twice and trust promises never. The documents told a clear story. My pension was mine alone. My savings account, untouched, except for a few transfers I had approved years ago to help Claire with her first mortgage payment. The life insurance payout, still mine. Quiet, intact, patient. Then there were the other papers, the ones that explained why Victor felt so comfortable discarding my cane like trash. The house. Claire's name was on it. Victor's too. But the down payment, a substantial one, came from me. A temporary loan, Victor had called it back then, smiling, shaking my hand as if we were business partners. No contract, no repayment schedule, just trust. Mine. I remembered the conversation clearly, how he said, "Of course we'll take care of you later." How vague that word had sounded even then. Later is a word people use when they don't intend to act. I felt no regret reading those papers. Regret implies a mistake. What I felt was awareness. Awareness that generosity without boundaries invites entitlement, and entitlement grows teeth. I made a list, not emotional, practical. What I owned, what I controlled, what I could withdraw from, legally, cleanly, without drama. I also noted what I no longer needed permission for. Victor liked to speak as if everything in that house ran because of him, but control is not ownership. It is performance. And performances collapse the moment the audience stops believing. That evening, I asked Claire to sit with me. Just us. No raised voices. No accusations. "I want to talk about my living situation," I said. Her shoulders stiffened instantly. "Are you unhappy here?" she asked, too quickly. "I am unsafe," I replied. She blinked. "Victor didn't mean—" "I'm not discussing his intentions," I said gently. "I'm discussing outcomes." Silence followed. Long. Heavy. I told her I would be making arrangements, that I would no longer rely on them for daily support, that I would be reviewing financial contributions I had made and adjusting future ones accordingly. She looked frightened then, not of me, of what this meant, of what stability she thought she had built suddenly showing cracks. "Are you mad?" she asked quietly. No, I said. I'm awake. That night, Victor barely spoke to me. I could feel his attention circling, searching for something he could still influence. But influence requires access, and I had begun closing doors he didn't know existed. In my room, I made one final note in my folder. A simple sentence, written carefully in my steady hand. Dependence is negotiable. Dignity is not. I closed the folder and slid it back into my bag. The pieces were in place now, not for a confrontation, not yet, for a correction that would be impossible to ignore. I chose the lawyer the way I chose most things now, quietly, without asking anyone's opinion. Her office was on the second floor of a low brick building near the river. No glass walls, no trendy slogans, just a brass plaque with her name and the word attorney underneath it. That word mattered to me. Titles are not decoration, they mean responsibility. I didn't tell Claire where I was going. I didn't tell Victor anything at all. Independence begins the moment you stop explaining yourself. The lawyer's name was Helen Moore. She looked to be in her early 70s, with short gray hair and eyes that missed very little. When she shook my hand, her grip was firm, not performative, just sure. "How can I help you?" she asked, settling behind her desk. I told her the facts, not the emotions. I have learned that facts are taken seriously in rooms like that. I told her about the fall, about the cane, about living in my daughter's home, about the money I had contributed. I slid the documents across the desk one by one, neatly organized. She listened without interrupting. When I mentioned the cameras, she raised her eyebrows slightly. Not in surprise, in interest. "You have footage?" she asked. "Yes," I said. Backed up. "Good," she replied. "That changes the conversation." I felt something loosen in my chest then. Not relief, validation. There is a difference. Relief fades. Validation stays. She explained my options carefully, not dramatically. She told me what I could reclaim and what I could not. What could be formalized. What boundaries could be enforced legally, not emotionally. She spoke to me as if I were competent, not fragile. I appreciated that more than I expected. "You're not looking to punish anyone," she said finally. "You're looking to regain control." "Yes," I replied. "And safety." She nodded. "That's reasonable." Reasonable. Such a powerful word when it's finally applied to you. We discussed living arrangements, temporary housing, assisted services I could choose, not endure. We discussed revising documents, power of attorney, medical directives, the quiet scaffolding that holds a life upright when other people start leaning too hard. Then she looked at me directly. "Do you want them to know you've spoken to me?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. Another nod. Wise. On the way home, I stopped for coffee. I sat alone at a small table by the window, watching people hurry past with the urgency of those who still believe time waits for them. My hip ached, but I didn't resent it. Pain is honest. It tells you where you stand. When I returned to the house, Victor's car was already in the driveway. He was home early again. That had become a pattern, surveillance disguised as concern. "How was your day?" he asked, too casually. "Productive," I said. He smiled, but his eyes searched my face. He was trying to read me the way he always had, looking for signs of submission, irritation, fatigue. He found none of them. That night, I updated my notes. Dates. Names. Options. Everything clear, everything clean. I wasn't building a trap. I was building an exit. And for the first time since moving into that house, I slept deeply. Not because the situation had resolved, but because I finally knew it would. Power doesn't announce itself. It returns quietly, the moment you stop giving it away. Victor noticed before he understood. Men like him always do. It started with small things. I stopped asking where things were kept. I stopped reminding him of appointments. I stopped adjusting my schedule around his moods. When I moved through the house, I did it slowly but deliberately, no longer shrinking my steps to avoid his irritation. The absence of my usual compliance unsettled him more than any argument could have. One morning, he asked Claire if I was feeling all right. I seemed different, he said, not unkindly, but with that faint edge that meant complaint. Claire glanced at me, then away. She's fine, she said. That was new. She didn't defend me, but she didn't soften his concern either. Neutrality is a dangerous thing when control depends on allies. Victor began manufacturing reasons to be present. He worked from home more. He lingered in doorways. He asked questions that didn't need answers. Where are you going? When will you be back? Do you need help with that? Each question sounded polite. Each one carried the same message. I am watching. I answered calmly. Always calmly. Out. Later. No. No explanation. No apology. It unnerved him. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, in how he checked the locks at night, in how he began glancing at the camera monitor more often than usual. He didn't suspect me yet. He suspected disorder. And disorder frightened him. One evening, he confronted me directly. You don't seem happy here anymore, he said, standing in the doorway of the living room. I never said I was, I replied. He laughed softly, as if I'd made a joke. We've done a lot for you, he said. You should feel comfortable. Comfortable. Another word people use when they mean compliant. I feel informed, I said. That stopped him. He studied my face carefully then, as if looking for something he'd misplaced. What does that mean? It means I see things more clearly now, I said. For the first time, he didn't have a response ready. After that, his patience thinned. He corrected Claire more sharply, snapped at their son over small things. Control, once threatened, seeks other outlets. I watched it happen without intervening, not because I didn't care, but because interference would have put me back into the role of buffer, the quiet absorber of tension. I was done with that. One afternoon, I heard him on the phone again. Same corner of the kitchen, same low voice. She's acting strange, he said. No, I don't think she's sick, just stubborn. Old people get like that. I smiled to myself in my room. Stubborn. I had earned that word. That night, I packed a small bag. Nothing dramatic. Just essentials. Documents. Medication. Clothes I liked, not the ones chosen for convenience. I placed the bag at the back of the closet, out of sight, but within reach. I wasn't leaving yet. Timing matters. Leaving too early looks like retreat. Staying too long looks like acceptance. Victor felt it slipping. I could see him trying to reassert control in subtler ways. He lowered his voice again, made small gestures of kindness. Once, he even suggested buying me a new cane. We can get a better one, he said. Something more stable. I looked at him. I'll decide that myself. He nodded, but his eyes hardened. That was the moment I knew he understood something had shifted. Not everything, but enough. He didn't know how. He didn't know why. But he felt it, the way animals sense a storm before the sky changes. I slept that night with the calm certainty of someone who has already crossed the most difficult line. The line between hoping someone will change and accepting that they won't. Victor thought this was a phase. He thought I would tire. He thought age would slow me down. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't preparing to fight him. I was preparing to step out of his reach and take something he assumed would always be there with me. My silence had stopped feeding him, and soon his confidence would follow. The conversation with Claire happened on a Sunday afternoon, when the house was unusually quiet and there were no excuses left to hide behind. Victor had taken their son to a birthday party. I knew that because Claire told me twice, as if repeating it would make the time safer. I waited until the door closed behind them, and the sound of the car faded before I spoke. "Sit with me for a moment," I said. She hesitated, then sat across from me at the kitchen table. She folded her hands the way she used to when she was a girl and knew she was about to hear something she didn't want to hear. That small gesture nearly broke my resolve. Nearly. "I need to talk to you about what happened," I said. "And about what has been happening." Her eyes dropped immediately. "Mom, if this is about Victor—" "It is," I said calmly. "But it's also about you." She inhaled sharply, then nodded. "Okay." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I told her facts, the way I would have told a doctor symptoms. I told her about the cane, about how I now moved through the house holding onto furniture, about the fear of falling and not being noticed, about the way decisions were made around me, not with me. She cried quietly while I spoke. Silent tears wiped away quickly, as if emotion itself were something that might irritate someone if it went on too long. "I didn't know it was that bad," she whispered. "You knew," I said gently. "You just learned how not to look." She flinched, but she didn't argue. I told her then that I had spoken to a lawyer, that I was making arrangements, that I would not be staying indefinitely, that I would also be reassessing my financial involvement in their lives. That was when fear replaced sadness on her face. "You're not cutting us off, are you?" she asked. The question hung between us, heavier than anything else she'd said. "I'm correcting something," I replied. "I'm removing the assumption that my help comes without limits." She looked at me like someone seeing a familiar room rearranged overnight. "Victor will be furious." "I know," I said. "And if he asks why?" she pressed. I met her eyes. "Then you can tell him the truth, or you can tell him nothing. But I won't lie anymore to make things easier for him." She sat back, shaking her head slowly. "I never thought it would come to this." "Neither did I said. "That doesn't mean it shouldn't." For a long time we sat in silence. Then she spoke again, quieter. "He doesn't like feeling challenged," she said. "I know," I replied. "That's why this is necessary." When Victor came home that evening, the air in the house had changed. Not dramatically, subtly. Claire was quieter, less eager to smooth things over. Victor noticed immediately. "Everything okay?" he asked, looking from her to me. "Yes," I said. "Everything is clear." That night, I heard them arguing in low voices behind their bedroom door. I didn't strain to listen. I didn't need to. Some things announce themselves without words. The next morning, Victor avoided me entirely. Claire brought me coffee without being asked. Her hands trembled slightly when she set the cup down. "I don't know what's going to happen," she said. "I do," I replied softly. "Change." She nodded, tears in her eyes again. This time, she didn't wipe them away. I went back to my room and sat on the bed, letting the quiet settle. I felt tired, but not weak. There is a difference between exhaustion and relief. Victor had built his authority on silence, mine and hers. And silence, once broken, does not return to its old shape. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. For the first time in a long while, I was no longer waiting for permission to exist. The moment didn't come with shouting. It never does when things are done properly. Victor chose it himself without realizing it. He cornered me in the living room 2 days after my conversation with Claire, standing between me and the hallway like the space belonged to him. "I don't like what's happening," he said. Calm voice, tight jaw. "You're creating tension in this house." I looked at him the way you look at a man who has finally said the thing he's been circling for weeks. "I'm responding to it," I replied. He crossed his arms. "Claire is upset. You're making her choose." "No," I said. "I'm making her see." That was when his mask slipped. Just slightly. Enough. "You're exaggerating," he said. "You always have. You're old, you're sensitive, and you read meaning into things that aren't there." Old. Sensitive. The words were familiar. They're useful words. They shrink reality until it fits someone else's comfort. I nodded once. "Then this will be easy." "What will?" he asked. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and took out my phone. I didn't raise it dramatically. I didn't aim it at his face. I simply placed it on the coffee table between us and tapped the screen. The video began to play. The hallway appeared. The timestamp. Me, leaning the cane against the wall. Victor entering the frame. I watched his reflection in the darkened television screen as he realized what he was seeing. His shoulders stiffened first, then his mouth tightened. "That's not," he started. The cane hit the bin. The lid closed. His voice. "You'll manage." Silence followed. Long. Thick. I let the clip finish. Then I played the second one. The angle that showed Claire stopping, seeing, and turning away. Victor's face went pale. Not angry. Not yet. Calculating. "You went through my things," he said. "No," I replied. "I watched you go through mine." "That footage means nothing," he said quickly. "Anyone can misinterpret." "It means exactly what it shows," I said, "and it's backed up." He stared at the phone like it might bite him. "You're threatening me?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'm correcting the record." Claire stood, frozen in the doorway. I hadn't heard her come in. Her face was colorless, eyes locked on the screen. "You did that?" she asked him. Victor turned to her, voice softening instantly. "It's not what it looks like. I was frustrated. I didn't think—" "You threw away her cane," she said. Her voice shook. "She could have fallen." "She didn't," he snapped, then stopped himself. That was enough. I stood slowly, carefully, steady without assistance. I felt every year of my age in that movement, and none of it embarrassed me. "I have spoken to a lawyer," I said. "I am making arrangements to leave. I will also be formalizing the money I contributed to this house. That will be handled legally, without discussion." Victor opened his mouth. "And," I continued, "if I ever hear my age used as an excuse for your behavior again, this footage will not stay private." The room was silent except for Victor's breathing. Short, uneven. Claire looked at me, then at him, as if seeing both of us for the first time. "You told me she was imagining things," she said quietly. Victor said nothing. I picked up my phone and slid it back into my pocket. "I won't be speaking about this again," I said. "I will be leaving on my own terms, and I will not be minimized in the meantime." I walked past him. He moved out of the way without thinking. That night, the house felt smaller. Not to me, to him. Because exposure doesn't destroy men like Victor. It simply removes the shadows they hide in. And once the light is on, nothing ever looks the same again. After that evening, consequences arrived quietly, the way grown things do. No shouting, no slammed doors, just shifts. Small at first, then unmistakable. Victor stopped pretending. The politeness vanished overnight. He no longer offered help or forced concern. Instead, he withdrew, as if distance could restore control. He spoke to me only when necessary and never alone. He avoided the hallway where the camera hung. He avoided my eyes entirely. That told me more than anger ever could. Claire changed too. Not dramatically. She didn't suddenly become brave or outspoken. Real change is slower than that. But she began noticing, asking questions she had trained herself not to ask, pausing before agreeing with him. Silence, redirected, becomes resistance. One morning, Victor didn't go to work. He sat at the table, laptop open, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and tense. I didn't need to hear the words to understand the tone. Damage control? Explanation? Reassurance. Men like Victor don't panic over morality. They panic over exposure. Later that day, Claire told me what I already suspected. "He's been put on administrative leave," she said, eyes red. There was a complaint. Unrelated, but timing matters. I nodded. Timing always does. Victor worked in management, leadership, people skills, a reputation built on calm authority and clean narratives. A man like that cannot afford questions, not at work, not at home. The footage never left my phone. It didn't have to. Once doubt enters a system, it spreads on its own. Victor became irritable, careless. He snapped at colleagues, missed details, overcorrected in meetings. His confidence, the thing he had relied on most, began to fray. Authority, when unsupported, collapses inward. At home, he tried once to regain ground. "You're tearing this family apart," he said to me late one evening when Claire was upstairs. His voice was sharp now, stripped of its polish. "No," I replied. "I stopped holding it together for you." He stared at me like I had spoken a foreign language. "You think this ends well for you?" he asked. "I think it ends honestly," I said. That frightened him more than any threat could have. The lawyer called 2 days later. Everything was moving forward, cleanly, legally, no drama, just corrections, entered into records that don't forget. Victor knew. He felt it in the way men feel loss before it's finalized. He became restless, defensive. He started sleeping badly, woke up angry, lived on coffee and resentment. Claire finally confronted him one night. I heard raised voices, her voice, not loud, but firm, his, sharp, then pleading, then silence. The next morning, he didn't speak to either of us. A week later, he moved out temporarily. That was the word he used. Temporary is a word people cling to when permanence feels like failure. Claire didn't stop him. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed while he packed a suitcase. Their son watched from the stairs, confused and quiet. No one explained anything. Children don't need explanations. They feel truth in the air. When Victor left, the house exhaled. Not relief, space. Claire sat with me that evening, exhausted, eyes swollen. "I didn't realize how much I was adjusting," she said, "how much of myself I was giving away." I put my hand over hers. "Now you do." That was all. I moved out 2 weeks later. Into a small, sunlit apartment near the river. No stairs. Quiet mornings. My own kettle. My own rules. I bought a new cane. Not because I needed to replace what was lost, but because I chose it. Lightweight, balanced, mine. Victor called once, left a message. Apology mixed with justification, regret diluted by self-pity. I didn't return the call. Some conversations end because they have already said everything that matters. Victor lost more than a job. He lost the certainty that he could define reality for others. And men like him never fully recover from that. I didn't win. I reclaimed. And that is something no one can take from you once you've done it. The weeks after the move passed more slowly than I expected, and at the same time, with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. My new apartment was small, but it belonged to me in a way that went beyond paperwork. Morning light came in through the kitchen window and landed on the table exactly where I drank my tea. No one adjusted the blinds. No one commented on the noise of the kettle. I noticed, with some surprise, how often I caught myself pausing, listening, waiting for disapproval that never came. That kind of waiting doesn't disappear overnight. It's learned behavior. It settles into the muscles. I unpacked carefully. Not everything at once. I took my time deciding where things belonged. At 68, you don't rush into new spaces. You let them tell you who you are now. The photographs went up last. I needed to see the walls first, unburdened by memory. My body was still my body. The hip still complained on cold mornings. The cane rested by the door, within reach but no longer central. I walked differently now, not faster, not stronger, but with more certainty. I trusted my steps again. Claire visited the second Sunday after I moved. She arrived alone. She looked thinner, tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, but her eyes were clearer. She stood in the doorway for a moment, as if unsure whether she was a guest or something else. "It's nice," she said. "It's enough," I replied. We sat at the table and drank tea. The silence between us was not heavy. It was unfamiliar, and therefore honest. She told me Victor had found a short-term rental. That work was complicated. That they were talking, slowly, carefully, like people stepping through a room filled with broken glass. "I don't know what will happen," she said. "You don't have to," I answered. "You just have to stop lying to yourself." She nodded, tears forming and not immediately falling. She stayed for an hour. When she left, she hugged me longer than necessary, as if confirming that I was still solid. After she was gone, I sat alone and let the quiet settle again. I thought about how many years I had spent being useful instead of being whole. How often women are praised for endurance and punished for boundaries. How age turns you invisible unless you inconvenience someone, and then you're suddenly very visible, but not as yourself. I began taking short walks along the river in the mornings. The path was flat. The air smelled like wet stone and leaves. People passed me without looking twice, and I found I liked that. I wasn't performing strength or weakness. I was simply there. Sometimes I replayed the moment with the cane in my mind. Not with anger anymore, with curiosity. It amazed me how clearly one action could summarize a person's character. Victor hadn't meant to be cruel. That was the most telling part. He had meant to be efficient. That is what makes people dangerous. I received one more message from him a month later. Longer this time. Carefully worded. He spoke about stress, misunderstandings, how things spiraled. He said he hoped someday we could move past it. I deleted it without responding. Moving past something implies leaving it behind unresolved. I had resolved it. Fully. One afternoon, while sorting through a box I hadn't unpacked yet, I found my old address book. Names crossed out. Numbers faded. People gone, or simply distant. I added a few new entries in careful handwriting. A neighbor who waved every morning. A woman from the building who liked to walk at the same pace I did. Connection doesn't arrive with noise. It grows when you stop isolating yourself to survive. At night, before bed, I sometimes caught my reflection in the mirror. The lines were still there, the gray hair, the familiar face. But something in the posture had changed. My shoulders sat differently. My eyes didn't scan the room for approval. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't proud in the way people expect pride to look. I was settled. And that, at this stage of life, is its own quiet victory. There was only one thing left to do. One final act that had nothing to do with Victor or Claire or the house I left behind. Something for myself, and I knew exactly when I was ready to do it. The last thing I did was not dramatic. That seems important to say. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't prove a point to a room full of people. I simply finished something I had started years ago and kept postponing because there was always someone else who needed me more. I went to the notary on a Tuesday morning when the office was quiet and no one hurried me through my sentences. I signed papers slowly, reading every line. I updated my will. I named my beneficiaries clearly. I protected what was mine so that no one could ever mistake my kindness for permission again. When I walked out, the air felt lighter, not because I had taken something away from anyone, but because I had finally put things where they belonged. That afternoon, I bought myself lunch at a small cafe by the river. I sat alone by the window and ordered what I wanted, not what was practical or cheap or easy to chew. I noticed how natural that felt now. No explanations, no justifications. At 68, you learn that peace doesn't come from fixing people. It comes from stepping out of roles that were never meant to be permanent. I still speak to Claire, carefully, honestly. Without rescuing her from choices she must make herself. She is learning, slowly, that love does not require self-erasure. I hope she keeps learning. But that is no longer my work. As for Victor, I rarely think of him now. When I do, it is without anger. Anger is heavy. I have carried enough weight in my life. He did not become a villain because of one action. He revealed himself. That is all. The cane stands by my door. I use it when I need it. I leave it behind when I don't. It no longer defines me. It never did. What defined me was the moment I stopped allowing someone else to decide what I deserved. There are women like me everywhere. You see them in waiting rooms, in grocery stores, moving carefully through spaces that have grown impatient with them. They have learned to apologize for taking time, for taking space, for taking care of themselves. If you are one of them, listen to me. You are not difficult. You are not dramatic. You are not asking for too much. You are asking to be treated like a human being. And if someone responds to that request by diminishing you, ignoring you, or discarding what supports you, believe them. Not their words, their actions. Then do what I did. Pause, observe, prepare. You don't need to shout to be powerful. You don't need revenge to reclaim yourself. You only need the courage to stop participating in your own disappearance. If this story felt familiar, if it touched something you've been carrying quietly for years, don't ignore that feeling. Share it. Talk about it. Let other women know they're not alone. and that it's never too late to choose dignity over silence.